All right. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to be here with R. Blank of Shield Your Body to talk about EMFs, what they are, and how we can protect ourselves and just reduce the impact that they can have on our health. So, welcome, R. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you very much, Megan. It's really nice to be here.
So, tell us a little bit about who you are, how you started in this field, and then we'll dive in a little bit more into EMFs.
Sure. So, well, as you said, my name's Blank. I run Shield Your Body. And I got into the area of EMF. My father he was one of the world's leading scientists in terms of EMF health effects, both in terms of his research and in terms of his advocacy. And in 2012, he was writing a book about what he'd learned in his career and what he'd done about what science knows and can say about the health effects of exposure to this type of radiation. And this book was supposed to be for general audience, and his skills were really writing for scientific audiences. So he asked me to help him out, and so I ended up co-writing the book with him. The book is overpowered. It's still now, almost 10 years later, one of the best books on the subject that's been written. And it was in the course of writing that book, it was wonderful writing a book with my father, but I also got a crash course in this subject from one of the world's leading researchers. And it was in the course of that experience that I came up with the idea for what has now become Shield Your Body.
So tell us just the basics of EMFs and why we need to be concerned about electromagnetic field radiation, right? That's right, EMF, right?
Yeah, so EMF, as you just said, EMF stands for electromagnetic fields. It's also sometimes called electromagnetic radiation. And it's a form of energy that is made up by, as the name suggests, electrical forces and magnetic forces. So it's electromagnetic radiation. Now, there's one kind of EMF that everyone is familiar with, and it's been around since the dawn of time, and that is sunlight. Sunlight is a form of EMF radiation. And really, until about 150 years ago, it was the only form that humanity and all living things were exposed to. Now, that's just one kind of EMF. There's multiple kinds of EMF. So there's types of EMF with more energy than sunlight. And those include things like X-rays and gamma rays, as well as UV rays. And everyone knows and agrees for a long time that stuff is really, really harmful, even in really, really small doses. And that's why you get dental X-rays as infrequently as possible. They cover you with a lead jacket when you get them, and the technician hoofs it out of the room, because that's how damaging they are. You want as little of that as possible. Now, there's other forms of EMF that have less energy than sunlight. These include things like radio waves and microwaves. And it was long thought that this stuff was safe, at least until a certain level. It was benign. It had no effect on humans or other living things. But over the past several decades, science has shown that assumption was incorrect. And so this type of EMF, it comes from anything that communicates wirelessly. So that includes cell phones, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. Any wireless device is a source of EMF radiation. That's actually how it communicates. It sends these EMF signals out to other devices that pick it up. EMF is also emitted by anything that runs on power. So that includes power lines, but it includes light bulbs and appliances, refrigerators, anything that generates or runs on AC power is a source of EMF as well. So that means, again, since about 1850, that's when this stuff started to be introduced into the environment. First, with the invention of the light bulb, then with the invention of the power grid to power the light bulb, then all the appliances that start popping up. Then you see the introduction of the wireless stuff, so FM radio, radar, television. And then as we get further down, closer to us in history, you have cordless phones, cell phones, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and so on. So until about 150 years ago, the only forms of this EMF that we're talking about that we were exposed to, again, like I said before, it's basically just sunlight, along with the Earth's own magnetic field, and lightning is also a source. But in general, really just very, very little of this stuff. And since about 1850, it's been growing and growing and growing exponentially. And in fact, today it's estimated that just an ambient level in a city, just an ambient level, you're not holding a phone up to your head, just in the environment, the level of EMF is over 1 trillion times higher than what would be found in nature.
Wow. I know. It's kind of mind blowing. And that's probably why they always talk about getting out into the wilderness and why it's so good for you.
That's one of the reasons. Yeah, nature is wonderful, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to go anywhere and not be exposed to at least some of it. I mean, cities in general are going to be the levels with the highest exposures, but even in national parks, they're putting up cell towers. And of course, you have satellites and other forms of EMF that are just transmitting. The FM radio, again, much lower than what you're talking about in the city, but it's becoming very, very hard to find a place on Earth without some exposure to human-made electromagnetic radiation.
Right. So why do we need to pay attention to EMFs and think about them more than often we just have our cell phone in our pocket, we really don't think about it. But why is it important?
So, it's the science is clear that this stuff is harmful. We can talk about that in a bit more detail if you want, but I know some people will say, "Oh, I heard there's a debate. I heard it's a question. Maybe do cell phones actually cause brain tumors?" The answer is science is clear that this stuff is bioactive and can cause a wide range of negative health effects. On the what we might call the less severe side, you have conditions like anxiety and sleep disruption. Not to say that those are insignificant, but they're on the less severe side. And then it goes all the way up to more serious conditions, including infertility, birth defects, miscarriage, and of course several types of cancer. And so the science is not only clear that this stuff impacts humans and all living things, it also demonstrates that this EMF impacts multiple systems in our body. So it's not like you only, when it comes to the question of cancer, for example, it's not like you only see this manifesting as brain tumors, although that's a serious one. It's one a lot of people are terrified of. But you also see it in thyroid cancer, colorectal cancer, in leukemia. So, but as I mentioned, it also is infertility. It can lead to birth defects. It can lead to melatonin suppression. It can lead to leakage of the blood-brain barrier, which is a very important system in your body for defending your brain against things like viruses. You see these impacts across almost every biological system. And so EMF impact, it's not just it impacts all bodies, it impacts all living things, even the different parts of our bodies. Now, so that's why it's such an important subject. Why people should care beyond that is because you actually have a lot of control over your personal exposure. So I mentioned, in the environment, there's a tremendous amount of this EMF, and that is true, and it's continually growing. And it's hopefully something that regulators at some point will do something about. But even absent all that, let's say you live in a city, in an apartment building, you turn on your computer and you see 20 Wi-Fi networks, you look out your window, you see 5, 10 cell towers, you have all of this stuff around you. And despite that, it is the tech that is closest to you that is contributing a massive amount of your own personal exposure. And that's because the power of EMF radiation diminishes exponentially with distance. So you mentioned the example of carrying your phone in your pocket, which is one of the things that I tell people right off the bat. One of the first things I always tell people is not to do. And in fact, if you look at the manuals for several of these cell phones, they actually tell you not to do it. Because if you do, then the radiation levels can exceed what's legally permissible. So if you just don't carry your phone in your pocket, if you are carrying your phone in your pocket and you just stop doing that, or put it into airplane mode when you do, you're cutting out a huge source of your own personal exposure. Again, regardless of the fact that there are all these other sources that are less under your control or not in your control. So it's important because the science is clear that this stuff is harmful, and because we actually have a lot of control over our own personal exposures.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really why I wanted to have you here today. And if you don't listen to my podcast, Toxin Free Talk, you should, and you should subscribe. But also, today's interview on the podcast is our blank too, talking about similar things and going a little bit more in depth. But I love that tip of, first of all, don't carry your cell phone in your pocket. If you do, put it on airplane mode first. But what other small tips do you have to share?
Sure. Well, and I'll share some specifics, but they all come down to the two key rules of EMF protection, which is minimize and maximize. So one is minimize, that's minimize your use of EMF emitting tech, and two is maximize, which is maximize the distance between your body and the tech when it is in use. So minimize, I come from a career actually in software development. I'm a child of well, I'm not a child anymore, but of but at the time what we thought was the tech revolution. It's since gotten a lot crazier than it was then. But, I grew up around tech. I mean, I didn't grow up around cell phones, and we didn't have a microwave in the house, but I grew up with computers. I grew up using TVs with remotes. We did have a cordless phone at one point. I am certainly not a Luddite. And like I say, I had a 20-year career in software engineering. I was building apps and games and stuff to run on all sorts of devices. I recognize that technology brings a tremendous amount of value to society. That said, there are ways to moderate your use without abandoning technology. So, in one class of those things is all this smart tech that the companies are trying to market to you like that you need or that you should have. A lot of it you don't need and you shouldn't have. So yes, while it may make perfect sense to have a cell phone, it does not necessarily make much sense to have a Wi-Fi enabled kitty litter box or even a Wi-Fi enabled refrigerator, what they call this smart tech, a smart fridge, a smart stove, a smart lock, a smart alarm. All of these things, they don't need to be smart. Now, in some cases, you may look at one of these products and think, this will add a lot of value to my life. But in general, the companies are banking on you just saying, oh, that's cool, or oh, my friend just got one, or oh, this is the future, and buying it. And that then increases your exposure. And of course, a lot of this stuff is either going to be in your home or on your body. So you're going to be having continual exposures to this stuff. So just don't buy smart tech mindlessly. Again, if there's a piece of tech that looks like it'll add a lot of value to your life, then you have to make that decision. But don't just buy this stuff mindlessly. That's one way to minimize. Another way to minimize is to turn this stuff off when you're not using it. So one key example there that applies to a lot of people, and by the way, has had really, really powerful results with the people who implement this, is turning off your Wi-Fi at night. Again, this is, in an ideal world, if you were really trying to slash your EMF, you'd get rid of your Wi-Fi and you'd put Ethernet in everywhere. But I'm a realist. A lot of people aren't willing to do that. A lot of people just are. It's so convenient to have Wi-Fi. They're not going to get rid of their Wi-Fi. So for those people, I say turn it off at night. Because at night you're not getting any value, you're not getting any benefit out of it, but you're still blanketing yourself and your family in the radiation from your Wi-Fi router. And again, as I said, a lot of people who try this report back, they sleep better than they have in years. They're way more rested, more energetic. This is one of those things where you don't have to wonder like, oh, is this really worth it? Because so many people actually say, wow, that I feel the difference. Mm-hmm. So another is turning your phone into airplane mode when you're not actually making use of the wireless connection. These are all ways that you can minimize your use of technology. It's not even coming close to giving up technology. You're engaging with it more mindfully. Yep. So that's minimize. The second I said is maximize, and that's maximize the distance. And I said this, I think I said this earlier, where it's the distance. The power of EMF radiation diminishes exponentially with distance. So if you take your phone and it's 1 inch away from you, and you move it 2 inches away from you, you've cut the power of that exposure by 75%. Mm-hmm. And so I used the example, we were talking about the example of not carrying your phone in your pocket, which is a really important one. But there's several like that. So maximizing the distance. Never hold the phone up to your head. Always use a headset or a speakerphone. keep the Wi-Fi router in your house as far away from you as possible. Never use your laptop in your lap. Again, I think this came up in the podcast interview. Yeah. So Dell markets a product called a laptop. They don't call it a notebook. They call it a laptop. And if you look in the manual, they tell you to keep it at least 7 inches away from your body. Now, there's no way that you can use it in your lap, keep it 7 inches away from your body. But this that's why the distance matters so much, because it really makes a big difference in terms of your actual exposure from this technology.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. And, I remember first hearing about EMFs and, from microwaves, thinking, oh, we shouldn't have a microwave in our house. And just, I started minimizing our use of our microwave. We still have one, but I keep it in the other room, and I start it and I use, go in the other room if it's running.
Yeah, that's the best way to use a microwave.
Yeah, and I honestly would love to get rid of it, but there are people in our house that are a little bit, that's too much for them. But when I first heard about EMFs, I was just totally overwhelmed, and I thought, I almost like shut down and thought, oh, I don't even want to know anymore. I'm just going to bury my head in the sand and, not worry about it. But of course, I'm still worrying about it a little bit. But the truth is, having a little bit of knowledge and knowing these two things, the minimizing your use and then maximizing the distance between yourself and the item that is emitting EMFs is, it makes a really big difference. And there are some things that we've done, like you said, like the airplane mode. We have no digital stuff in our bedroom. We charge it in a different room, and then also doing the router and having a timer on there, because what's the point in having it on and emitting those EMFs if it's not even being used at the time? So turning it off overnight is such a great tip. So if anyone has any questions, I have a few live listeners. If there's any questions, go ahead and pop them in the comments, and hopefully we can address them. But it's been really great listening to you and sharing this information. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you so much. And anyone who's interested, I have a free guide. It's available for download on my website. Just go to the front page at shieldyourbody.com. It's shieldyourbody, all in one word.com. And it's right there. The big button says get the guide. And it's a really useful starting point for a lot of people as they're just learning about this issue to learn the ways they can actually exercise more control over their exposures. Because I understand, when people are new to this subject, or they're just hearing about it, it can start to feel overwhelming. Just like I was outlining at the start of this interview, where, over the past several decades, it's just the number of sources keep exploding. And seemingly, without any control, very little regulation. And once you learn that this stuff, that what the science is saying, you start to, some people get really worried. Some people get terrified. These aren't, I understand it, but they aren't useful responses. And it's important for people to realize that there is a lot that they can do to take back control and to reduce their exposure and to minimize their health risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no questions have come in. So thank you again for doing this interview and for my podcast episode. It's really great. Go listen to it at toxinfreetalk.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll be in touch.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.